Usually when we think of a world-famous masterpiece of art, we picture, we picture a highly guarded, singular physical object.
Right, like the Mona Lisa or something.
Exactly. You picture the Mona Lisa behind bulletproof glass in the Louvre, or, I don't know, Michelangelo's David standing tall in the Accademia Gallery in Florence. You can book a ticket, walk into the room, point at it, and say to yourself, there it is, the original, the exact piece of material the master worked on.
Yeah, there is a definitive physical anchor to the fame in those cases. You are sharing space with the exact object the artist's hands actually touched. It creates a very tangible connection to history.
But then you look at one of the most recognizable, iconic images of human perfection in history, like the ultimate symbol of athletic prowess, and that entire concept of the original masterpiece just completely shatters.
It really does. It falls apart entirely.
Because on this deep dive, we're talking about a statue that is permanently burned into your brain,
Yeah.
an image you have absolutely seen 100 times in your life, which, ironically, it doesn't actually exist anymore.
It is the ultimate ghost of the art world, an absence that somehow managed to conquer the globe.
Today we are diving into the archives on the Discobolus, the famous ancient Greek discus thrower. And our mission for you today is to uncover how a lost ancient bronze statue managed to completely shape our modern idea of human perfection.
Which is quite a journey considering what we're working with.
Right. We are going to look at how it survived exclusively through a bizarre ancient copycat economy, how it ended up at the center of some truly hilarious 18th century artistic blunders.
The blunders are incredible.
They really are. And finally, we'll get into how the sheer power of its aesthetic made it a geopolitical pawn in the 20th century.
So, to set the stage for you, we have to travel back to the dawn of the classical period in ancient Greece. This is around 60 to 450 BC.
Okay, so a very long time.
It's very long. The sculptor Myron creates the original Discobolus, and it's cast entirely in bronze, and it depicts a nude Greek athlete frozen mid-throw right before he releases the discus.
So that original bronze casting is the bedrock of what we're talking about today.
Exactly. That bronze is the foundation.
Right. And to understand why this specific pose became, the gold standard for Western art, we have to actually look at the physical mechanics of the object itself. Or I should say what the object depicts.
Because it's not quite as realistic as people think.
No. Because when you really look at the physics of the pose, the illusion of perfection starts to get a little bit weird.
Well, what's fascinating here is Myron's absolute genius in capturing a highly specific fleeting fraction of a second. He's conveying the movement of the body at the exact moment of its maximum tension and potential energy.
It's that split second of stasis, right?
Yes, exactly. The tightly wound pause right before the violent release of the discus.
It's like a coiled spring, like the moment you pull a slingshot all the way back, right before you let go.
That's a great way to put it. And in a static medium like bronze or marble, achieving that feeling of potential energy was revolutionary. Myron achieves this through what the Greeks called symmetria.
Symmetria. Which sounds like symmetry.
But it doesn't mean symmetry like a mirror image where the left side perfectly matches the right. It's actually about mathematical ratios.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's the philosophical idea that the length of the finger must relate perfectly to the length of the hand, which relates to the forearm, which relates to the torso. It is treating the human body like an architectural equation.
Wait, so he's essentially using Pythagoras-level math applied to human anatomy to make the pose feel perfectly balanced, even though the guy is leaning completely over.
Essentially, yes. And he also utilizes the contrapposto stance.
Right, contrapposto.
Where the athlete's weight is subtly shifted from one leg to the other, creating a dynamic, asymmetrical tension in the hips and shoulders.
Which was a big deal at the time, right?
A massive leap forward, especially compared to the older, stiff, rigid sculptures of the archaic period, where figures just stood straight up with their arms glued to their sides. Myron gave art a semblance of real, dynamic, believable motion.
Okay, well, let's unpack this idea of believable motion for a second. Because if you look at the statue, and if you are listening, just picture that classic bent-over discus thrower in your head. If this guy is throwing a heavy metal disc with maximum bodily tension, why does his face look like he's waiting in line at the post office?
It is completely blank.
It makes no sense physically. The limbs are outflung in this massive effort, yet the expression is remarkably serene.
The contrast between the body and the face is very jarring to a modern viewer.
It's like an action movie still, where The hero is diving away from a massive explosion, but his hair is absolutely perfect, and he just looks mildly bored by the fireball. I mean, if you've ever watched modern Olympic throwers, their faces are contorted, they're grunting, veins are popping out of their neck.
Right, it's a very visceral effort.
Exactly. But this guy shows zero muscular strain in his torso or his face.
The art historian Kenneth Clark observed this beautifully in our sources. He wrote that Myron has created the enduring pattern of athletic energy, taking a moment so transitory that modern students of athletics still debate if it's even feasible.
Which is wild.
It is. But Clark also notes that to the modern eye, Myron's desire for perfection made him, and I quote, suppress too rigorously the sense of strain in the individual muscles.
Suppressed too rigorously. That is a very polite art historian way of saying Myron basically photoshopped out the ugly effort face.
Yeah, he essentially airbrushed it. And he did that because, to a 5th century Greek mind, showing physical strain was actually a sign of weakness.
Wait, really?
Weakness?
Yes, it meant your mortal body was failing your mind.
Oh, wow. But that philosophical choice to airbrush the face created a massive physical irony when you look at the mechanics of the throw itself. There's a revelation in the sources that completely blew my mind.
About the throwing form.
Yeah. By modern track and field standards, the iconic pose of the Discobolus is actually a terrible, highly inefficient way to throw a discus.
It really is. You would never teach an athlete to throw like that today.
Yeah.
They do a full spinning rotation to build momentum.
Right. It appears quite unnatural to a modern human trying to maximize throwing distance. But there's a fascinating historical theory for why Myron might have sculpted it exactly this way.
Which is why?
Well, ancient sports were often derived directly from military training or religious rituals. So some historians suggest that ancient Olympic athletes might have used a mandatory three-quarter rotation as a deliberate handicap.
Wait, a deliberate handicap, like tying one hand behind your back to make the game harder. Why would they do that?
Because in a military or ritualistic context, adherence to a specific, highly disciplined form was considered a higher display of mastery than just brute strength.
Ah, okay.
The idea is that making the sport more difficult through a set, inefficient rotation actually proved the athlete's skill more effectively than just throwing the object as far as mechanically possible.
It wasn't just about distance.
Exactly. It was about demonstrating absolute obedience to a difficult, prescribed form.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the pose is physically inefficient and the face totally lacks realistic human strain, why on earth did Myron sculpt it this way? Why did this become the unquestioned masterpiece? Like, what was the mindset of 5th century BC Greece that made this the ultimate ideal?
To understand that, we have to recognize that the ancient Olympic Games were not just sporting events or, Sunday entertainment.
Right.
They were deeply intertwined with Greek culture and religion. The Discobolus embodies a core Greek philosophical concept known as kalokagathia.
Kalokagathia.
Yeah. It is the philosophy that the harmonious development of the body and the mind are inextricably linked.
So they're connected.
Closely connected. Physical beauty and physical prowess were celebrated as integral, visible components of a virtuous life.
It's like if today we believe that winning an Olympic gold medal automatically meant you were also the most ethical, morally pure person on earth.
Exactly. To the Greeks, physical fitness was literal evidence of a good soul. Your outside reflected your inside.
That perfectly explains the serene face, then.
Yes, it does.
The lack of strain isn't a mistake or like a lack of anatomical knowledge. It is a deliberate, philosophical manifesto. Myron is showing a man who can exert maximum physical effort while maintaining absolute inner calm and mental discipline.
That is the peak of kalokagathia. The mind is completely effortlessly in control of the physical vessel.
That completely changes how you look at it. It's not a sports photograph, it's practically a religious text cast in metal.
It really is.
But this brings us to the craziest part of the story. What blew my mind in the research is that Myron's actual original bronze masterpiece, the one we've been talking about, is completely gone.
Lost to history.
Melted down, destroyed. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Everything we are talking about today is based on Roman bootlegs.
Yeah. We only know it because of what we could call an ancient copycat economy.
A copycat economy.
The Romans absolutely revered Greek art and culture. And wealthy Romans wanted these specific masterpieces for their own villas and gardens. But the Greek originals were rare. And bronze itself was highly valuable as a raw material. So during times of war or economic collapse, Countless bronze statues were simply melted down to make weapons or coins.
So the Romans had to make their own versions. But how did they actually do that if they didn't have the original artist around?
They developed an incredibly sophisticated system of mass reproduction. They would use tools like calipers and pointing machines.
Pointing machines.
The pointing machine is basically a wooden frame with measuring needles. It allows a sculptor to take exact mathematical points from a plaster cast of the original and transfer those coordinates onto a raw block of marble.
Oh, wow.
They were literally drilling by numbers to create full-scale marble copies.
But wait, marble and bronze act totally differently, physically speaking, right?
They behave completely differently. Bronze is hollow, lightweight, and has incredibly high tensile strength.
Right.
You can have a bronze statue with its arms flung wide open, and it will hold its own weight perfectly.
But marble is heavy.
Incredibly heavy. And extremely brittle. If you try to carve a guy leaning over with his arms outstretched in solid marble, the arms will just snap off under their own weight.
Okay, is that why whenever you see a classical marble statue in a museum, there's almost always a weird, ugly tree stump or a random pillar attached to the guy's leg?
That is exactly why. Those tree trunks are structural crutches. The Roman copyists had to add them to keep the heavy marble from collapsing.
So our entire visual understanding of Greek perfection is basically based on the Roman equivalent of a mass-produced, structurally modified poster you buy at a museum gift shop.
Pretty much.
I found a detail in the sources that proves just how ubiquitous these copies were. There's a dialogue written by a satirist named Lucian of Samosata.
Ah, yes. In his work, Philipseudes.
Right, which translates to lover of lies, and it reads exactly like two people trying to remember the name of a movie.
It really does.
One character says, "Didn't you notice a totally gorgeous statue up there? The one bent over into the throwing position, with his head turned back to the hand that holds the discus, and the opposite knee slightly flexed, like one who will spring up again after the throw."
Very specific description.
Super specific.
Yeah.
And the other character instantly replies, "Oh, that's one of Myron's works."
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that specific written description by Lucian is actually what saved the legacy of the Discobolus.
Wait, really? The text saved it?
Yes. Because for centuries after the fall of Rome, those marble copies were buried, smashed, and lost. The original bronze was obviously long gone.
Right.
The world only knew Myron's masterpiece had ever existed because textual descriptions like Lucian's survived in libraries.
Which means for hundreds of years, art historians were just reading about a cool statue and trying to guess what it looked like.
Exactly. It led to massive confusion. Before a true copy of Myron's pose was actually dug out of the ground, 17th and 18th century art historians were desperately trying to match the famous name Discobolus to whatever ancient statues they did have sitting around.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They mistakenly applied the name to a completely different standing figure holding a discus, which was actually a statue called the Discobolus, by a sculptor named Nakides.
So they just saw a guy holding a piece of sporting equipment and said, "Close enough. Must be the Myron masterpiece. Print it."
Exactly. They were working blindly from ancient texts, trying to piece a massive historical puzzle together without the box cover.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you have all these wealthy European collectors, these, British aristocrats on their grand tours of Europe who have read the ancient texts and know this specific Myron statue is the Holy Grail.
The ultimate prize.
Right. Actually, digging up a Roman copy of the Discobolus became the goal. And in 1781, they finally hit the jackpot with the discovery of the Discobolus Polumbra.
Yes. It was found at a Roman property owned by the Massimo family, the Villa Palombara. It was a 1st century AD marble copy of Myron's original.
Okay.
The Italian archaeologist Giovanni Battista Visconti takes one look at it, compares it to Lucian's text about the bent knee and the head looking back, and realizes they have found the ghost. It was an instant international sensation.
But the drama doesn't stop with the Massimo family. Because 9 years later, in 1790, a second notable copy is excavated at Hadrian's Villa.
Right?
An English antiquary named Thomas Jenkins buys it at auction, and then he turns around and sells it to a wealthy British collector named Charles Townley for £400, which is a massive fortune back then.
Huge sum.
But there was a hilarious problem. The Roman copy that Townley bought was heavily battered when it was pulled out of the dirt. The head was broken off. It needed to be restored, and the restorers completely botched the job.
They attached the head entirely incorrectly. If you remember Lucian's precise description you read earlier, the athlete is supposed to have his head turned back to the hand that holds the discus. He should be looking back at the weight, preparing to throw.
Right.
But on the Townley copy, the restorers attach the head so the athlete is looking straight forward down at the ground.
He's just staring at the dirt while throwing a discus.
It breaks the entire line of the symmetria, it ruins the tension, and it ignores the historical text.
Wait, how do you mess up a world-famous statue that badly?
Well, a prominent critic of the era, a man named Richard Payne Knight, immediately pointed this out to Townley. He basically said, you paid a fortune for this masterpiece, and they glued the head on facing the wrong direction.
I can only imagine the cognitive dissonance Townley must have felt. You spend a fortune on the ultimate symbol of perfection, and someone tells you it's a defective bootleg. Did he fix it?
No. Townley was incredibly stubborn. He possessed a deep psychological need to own the best version of antiquity. So he convinced himself that his version, the one looking at the ground, was actually the original and better copy, and that the Palambara version and Lucian's ancient texts were somehow the ones that were wrong.
That is next-level denial. He's like, no, the ancient Greeks definitely wanted him looking at the grass.
Yeah.
My money was well spent.
It really was sheer stubbornness. And because he was so wealthy and influential, that completely wrong statue eventually became the centerpiece of his collection and went to the British Museum in 1805.
Unbelievable. But as funny as the wrong head is, the sources mention another restoration blunder that is somehow even worse.
Oh, the Minot restoration. This really highlights the danger of the copycat economy when context is lost.
Right.
In the early 18th century, a French sculptor named Pierre-Étienne Minot found a Roman marble torso. Just the twisting torso, no arms, no legs.
Okay.
Now today, art historians recognize that this torso was clearly an example of Myron's Discobolus. The musculature perfectly matches, but Minot didn't know that.
Right, because they hadn't found the full Palambara copy yet to compare it to.
Exactly. So he looked at this leaning torso and decided it wasn't an athlete at all. He completely misidentified it, and he restored it by adding his own newly carved arms and legs to turn it into a wounded gladiator.
A wounded gladiator?
Yes, who is supporting himself on his arm as he sinks to the ground dying.
I cannot get over this. He took the ultimate symbol of peak physical perfection, the absolute zenith of Greek athletic victory, and accidentally turned it into a dying guy bleeding out in the dirt.
The artwork became a blank canvas for whoever found it centuries later, and Pope Clement XII actually donated Minot's completed wounded gladiator to the Capitoline Museums before 1734, where it still remains on display today.
That is just wild. But, this desperation to own the perfect human form didn't die with 18th century British aristocrats.
No, it didn't.
Once the 20th century arrived, that same aesthetic obsession with idealized physical perfection was weaponized by totalitarian regimes.
Looking strictly at the historical timeline provided in our sources, the statue became entangled in the geopolitics of World War II.
Right.
The obsession with what the statue represented drew the attention of Adolf Hitler. In 1937, Hitler began negotiations to buy the Discobolus Palambara,
which was the very first intact copy that was discovered back in 1781.
Correct.
And according to the archives, he succeeded in 1938. The sale was executed by Italy's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Galeazzo Ciano. He sold the Discobolus Palambara to Hitler for 5 million lire.
The sources highlight that this was done over the massive protests of Giuseppe Bottai, who was the Italian Minister of Education,
Right.
as well as the protests of the broader Italian scholarly community. They understood the immense cultural value of the piece and fought against it leaving Italy.
But despite those protests, the statue was shipped by rail to Munich. It was displayed there in the Glyptothek Museum. It remained in Germany throughout the war and was eventually returned to Rome in 1948, where it's currently displayed at the Palazzo Massimo.
It really shows you the sheer power of this image.
Yeah, that thousands of years after it was made, leaders of nations are using a marble copy of a bronze original as a geopolitical trophy, just to claim ownership of what it symbolizes.
This raises an important question about the modern legacy of the Discobolus. Its influence hasn't stopped. It has transcended being just a statue and has become a permanent archetype in our collective psyche.
Completely. And the best example of how deeply this is burned into our culture is happening right now.
You're talking about the exhibition.
Yeah. If you go to Bodies, the exhibition, the famous traveling anatomy exhibition, there is a display that brings this entire story full circle in the most literal, visceral way possible.
You're referring to the plastinated figure.
Yes. In the exhibit, they have taken an actual, real human corpse, preserved it through plastination, and posed it exactly like the Discobolus, complete with a discus in hand.
It is a fascinating evolution of the form. Myron started with the idea of a real human body, idealized it, mathematically proportioned it, and cast it in bronze. The Romans copied it in marble using pointing machines. 18th century restorers pieced it back together, sometimes backwards. And now, in the 21st century, we have taken an actual human body and manipulated the flesh to mimic the ancient statue.
We are forcing reality to match the illusion.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking for the source of our modern idea of human perfection. And what we found is a paradox.
A massive one.
We found a physically inefficient athletic pose with an impossible stress-free face that was designed perfectly to capture the ancient Greek philosophy of mind-body harmony, a masterpiece that was completely lost to time.
Yet it was kept alive through a fragile chain of cheaper, structurally modified Roman copies. It was saved by a single written description by a satirist.
Right.
It survived the stubbornness of British collectors attaching the wrong heads, endured being turned into wounded gladiators, and survived being used as a geopolitical pawn in the 20th century.
It really proves that art isn't just about the physical object. Art is about what a culture chooses to idealize, what it desperately wants to remember, and what it projects onto the canvas of history.
Beautifully said.
Which leaves you with one final, truly wild thought to mull over. If our entire visual understanding of the perfect Greek athlete is based exclusively on cheaper Roman copies, some of which had the wrong heads attached, or were accidentally turned into dying soldiers by confused 18th century restorers, are we actually admiring ancient Greek genius? Or have we just been hypnotized by centuries of Roman fandom, structural crutches, and historical guesswork?
It's something to think about.
Next time you see that perfect iconic image of the discus thrower, remember, you're looking at a ghost. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.